Today I'm going to try and explain some of the differences when it comes to training by pace, by heart rate monitor, and by power meter. 5.33 miles, 90 minutes, 20 seconds per mile, 138 beats per minute, and 193 watts in terms of my power for this run, which was an easy run. I'm in the middle of a recovery phase, and I thought today's run and right now would be a good time to kind of talk about the differences on training by pace, by heart rate, and power meter, because I'm gearing up for what's next. And as I'm looking at a lot of different training plans, I'm getting different training plans that are telling me things by like 5K pace, or by heart rate zone, or by power zone. And so I've been looking at a lot of these different things, and I thought it'd be a good time to talk about when to use each one, what are the strengths are, and what are some of the drawbacks. So the first one that I'll do is I'll talk about pace. Now that's probably the thing that most people are familiar with and kind of start out learning, because it's the most kind of widely applicable. And so when you're training by pace, you might have most of your runs at kind of easy pace, and that's just kind of a running by feel, which is always a completely valid way of running. But when it comes to specific workouts, you might start seeing things on your training plan or kind of whatever you have coming up on the workout as running at either threshold pace, which could be like somewhere between your half marathon and your 10K pace. You might get some intervals at 5K pace, and you might get some faster reps at your mile pace. And so those are kind of times or miles per minute or kilometers per minute figures on your watch that you're supposed to hit to let you know the thing that we're trying to measure with all these three different modalities, which is level of effort, or how hard are you working. Now, that's easy to use for a lot of people because all it takes is like a GPS watch, and you can get your speed or your pace instantaneously for any of those types of run that you're doing. And as long as you hit the pace, then you've done the workout according to plan. The downside of using pace is that it doesn't take into effect a variety of things, such as if it's a windy day, if it's a hilly type of condition, or your personal level of tiredness or fatigue, both within the workout and within the course of your training block, or how you're just feeling on that particular day. And so the risk in running or training only by pace is that on certain days, you might be running harder than you're intending, or you might be running easier than you're intending for any given workout. And ultimately, it might not seem like too big a deal, but I think if we can use kind of like a weightlifting analogy, there are some times when you're weightlifting, maybe you're in a bulk building phase and you want to do lots of weight and fewer reps. There might be other times when you're going to be working more on tone and other types of endurance in terms of lifting weights, where you're doing lower weight but more reps. Now, if you're in that situation where you're trying to do lower weight and more reps, maybe doing sets of 10, maybe even sets of 12, 15, but you're doing too much weight on there, it's going to be counterproductive in terms of what you're really trying to do. Yes, you're still lifting weights and it's overall good for you, but you might be working harder, not smarter in that situation. And so similar with all these different types of paces that you might be targeting on your workout, those are intended to create certain very specific kinds of responses from your body to those workouts. And you want to make sure you're doing that. So if it's a day where you're working on threshold is really important because it's at that point where your body is switching over from aerobic to anaerobic and you're clearing lactic acid, and that's the activity and level of exertion that you're focusing on. If you're running too fast, you're going to be building up and clogging up with lactic acid too fast, and you're not going to be able to complete the workout properly. And so you want to make sure you're being able to do that, especially for your longer distance races, where the ability to run close to that threshold for as long as possible is really important. Because as you're doing that workout, you're hopefully being able to condition your body to either process the lactic acid faster or being able to, or in other words, push up that pace for which you can run for a long extended period of time. So you want to make sure that you're getting in the right workout. And so when you're running only by pace, that clock, the time doesn't lie, it never bends. And so you might be having to work harder to reach the workout as written which might not accurately reflect what's going on physiologically in your body, if that makes sense. So those are the benefits. It's easy to do. Everyone can apply it. You just figure out what your times are, and then you run the workout. The drawbacks is that it might not always be 100% accurate for what you're trying to do. That's where our heart rate monitors come in, and the one that I use is this just chest strap monitor. I don't think I need to do disclosures for this video. I'll put disclosures in the description. But I have a chest strap monitor to go over my heart rate. Yes, I know a lot of watches have optical sensors built into the wrist. They never seem to work for me. I think it's because I'm bony, and all the tendons and stuff that are in here are impeding my ability to get a solid reading. So either a chest strap or even the armband, where I've got a little bit more meat up in the forearm, those are what I run with. And with that, you end up setting different target zones. So rather than paces in terms of minutes per mile or kilometers per mile, you're setting up heart rate zones. So my easy zone is like 130 to 145 beats per minute. And my threshold zone is right now right around like 165 to 170. My intervals are gonna be at like 170, 175. And then my repetitions, like mile pace, is gonna be a lot higher than that. I'm not really sure how much. The drawbacks to using heart rate as a training tool is that when you get to the point where you're running those intervals and those repetitions, the durations usually aren't that long. Most of the time you're doing those at like half-mile repeats or mile repeats, which are gonna take 3 to 6 minutes. Now in that situation, the heart rate, there's sometimes a bit of a lag in terms of when you're starting your workout, or that on portion where you're doing those reps or those intervals, and when you've stopped doing that activity. And so like, let's say I'm running and it's part of a longer run, and I have a portion where I have to do a 2-mile repeat or a 1-mile repeat. The moment that I start running, it takes a little bit for my heart rate to kind of like catch up to how much harder I'm suddenly now working. So there's gonna be a period of time where I'm not sure if I'm running too hard or not hard enough, because I have to kind of guess at a certain level of effort what will make my heart rate accelerate up and then reach that level that I want it to reach to. So I have to like pick a pace and then hope my heart rate catches up to it. If I'm ending up running too fast or too hard, or giving too much effort, then I have to slow it down with the hope. So it's kind of like you're always trying to get to right at the level, but it's more often a wave where you're like, all right, compensating, now I gotta compensate the other way, and you have to keep going kind of back and forth. I equate it to kind of like steering a ship, where it's not like you're steering a car on a road where the input is really immediate. When you steer a ship, you turn it, and then after a while, then the boat will turn. So that's where some of the drawbacks are with heart rate. When you're doing shorter, faster, more intense work, the heart rate becomes less reliable of a tool. That's where things like power come in, and this is a Stride power meter. I clip it to the front of my shoe. I have it on all my runs because it picks up where kind of the benefits of heart rate training fall off. So in terms of, let's say I start running that 800 meter repeat or 800 meter interval, the power meter will instantly know how much force that I'm generating at my foot. So it can give me those numbers instantaneously, whereas the heart rate would give me a lag of 30 seconds to a minute in terms of figuring out where exactly I am. The power meter gives me an instantaneous view of how hard I'm working at the moment. The other strength that the power meter gives me is that it can account for when things are hilly. The power number that it's giving me is going to let me know, regardless of what pace I'm running, is going to let me know kind of how hard I'm working to get up the hill. So it's useful when you're monitoring your power number. Let's say you have a goal power number that you're going to run at for a race. If it's hilly, it'll let you know when you're going uphill, you know what, it's okay to slow down as long as you're staying within this certain power number kind of range, because it's going to enable you to maintain a certain level of effort throughout the entire race without the risk of kind of burning too hot at beginning portions of the race because there is an uphill section. So that's where it's really, really useful. I think some of the downsides of it, and there aren't that many in terms of training with power, I think it's a really useful tool. I've been underutilizing it for sure. I've been trying to focus on understanding heart rate. But as I'm starting to look forward now to running some shorter intervals, that's where I think the power number is going to be really, really important. There are some watches that can give you power from the wrist as well. And my very basic level of testing of those is that the reliability is pretty similar. The numbers, the scales are going to be a little bit different, or they're off by a constant, I think. But the numbers are pretty comparable. but it will give me that immediate feedback in terms of how hard am I working for an 800 meter repeat or 400 meter repeat, and how hard am I working on my recovery portions. So that part's pretty cool. There, I think, is the potential for variability depending on shoe and your surface that you're running on. I'm not sure how big or prominent a problem that actually is. I think that there are going to be variability there. But I think that it's not going to be so big that it's going to make the data inaccurate if you're someone like me who switches between shoes a lot. The other thing that I generally am concerned about, though, in the difference between the stride, if we're doing like a head-to-head, which one is better, I do think that the heart rate is directly measuring kind of like my cardiac activity, where the power meter is kind of like a proxy measurement of how hard my body is working based on forces that it's detecting at the foot level. So it's kind of like 1 degree of separation removed from like what my body is actually doing in terms of my cardiovascular and muscular systems. But I think that that's okay. It looks at all your training, easy days, hard days, recovery days, everything that you're doing. And it can give you something called a critical power, which is basically your threshold number. It's a pace that you can maintain for an hour before you basically bonk, which is, I think, for me, the definition of threshold. So it gives you that, and from there it creates different zones for you to work at. So there's an easy zone, which my easy zone, and it constantly is updating in the Stride Power Center. I don't know about every day, but periodically it updates itself based on kind of like, I think you're rolling 90 days previous history. And so my easy zone is 171 to 210 watts. Today's was 193, so I'm smack dab in the middle of it, and it felt like an easy run. My heart rate tells me it's an easy run. My mind was telling me it was an easy run as well. So all those things are kind of lining up. My threshold, it tells me that it's 237 to 263, which based on some other runs that I've done where I've been doing threshold type of work in like mile repeats and 2 mile repeats as I was getting ready for the Heritage Trail run that I did. It's a giant truck. As I was getting for the Heritage Trail run that I did, I feel like it lines up again pretty well in terms of telling me what I think my threshold power should be in terms of that zone, where my heart rates were, and kind of what my paces are. So things are lining up pretty well, assuming that those paces are run on kind of like a flat level surface at like a relatively fresh level of exertion. And then it gives me other zones for interval work, which again I think would consider like that 5K pace, and also for repetitions, which I would consider kind of like mile pace, at least for a long distance runner. Here's how I make use of kind of all 3 of those things. I think that the shorter you're going to be running, let's say you're a high school miler or shorter or faster, or let's say you're a sprinter, I think by running by pace is probably the best thing. I don't think you really need a heart rate monitor except for your recovery days and your easy days, which is still going to be probably a majority of your workouts. So I think it's useful. But I think in terms of your workouts and at the high school and college level, when you're running as a track athlete, as even a distance track runner, which would be like an 800 or a miler, I think pace is going to be the most efficient and effective way for you to train. I think once you get into like middle distance to longer distance, so like let's say you're a 2 miler and basically above, or let's say just for the sake of simplicity, like 5K and above for I think let's say like adults, people that are just normal amateur hobby runners. I think 5K and above is where heart rate is gonna really work well for you, with the like sweet spot for being 5K to like marathon. And I think that for me, as a long distance runner, I think that the power meter makes the most sense for me because of its sensitivity to hills and changes in grade. And even now there's a wind sensitive version, which I don't have, but there's a wind sensitive version as well. I feel like the case for power makes the most sense at like the half marathon to the ultra distance category, because that's where those little kind of slight errors in terms of overexertion at the very early stage of a race can have really broad implications at something that happens to you like 2 or 3 hours later. So that's kind of where these tools all fit for me. Now, are there sprinters that are using the power meter to exceptional levels of success? Sure. Are there ultra marathoners that run by feel and don't even have a watch? Absolutely. But for someone that's trying to understand and gauge and target their level of effort to the plan in terms of what they're supposed to be doing on any kind of given day. Let's say you're following a training plan. I think that these are 3 different types of training that can all fit. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I use heart rate and power at the same time. And I'd like to get back to running kind of by paces and feel, but I feel like for me, I have a hard time like mentally, my mental speedometer is just something off about it. So I like kind of having those numbers to kind of help guide me along my workout. So that was a lot of information. I didn't talk at all about how to populate those zones. Like, how do you figure out what your 5K pace is? How do you figure out what your threshold intervals are for, or your threshold ranges are for heart rate or power? If you're interested in that, let me know in the comments. I can follow up and make another video about that, but I wanted to try and keep this a little bit condensed. But I'm not an expert in any 3 of these, but this is just kind of my experience with them and how they make sense to me and why I wear the devices that I do, because I like having them and more than just kind of like wearing tech for the sake of tech. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense for you guys. If you have any other questions, put them in the comments down below. I'd love to keep the conversation going down there. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. I know this one was a little bit longer and tougher to get through, but I appreciate that. Hope you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?